What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Just Stories with BT. I am really excited this week. I know I say that every time. I say I'm really excited, but this time it's coming from a different place because our guest today, Tracy Jackson, is a friend of mine who I've known for, I just did the math, 15 years, which is crazy. And she had a massive impact on my life and my career in kind of my first major job that I had when I was young. And so I'm really excited about our conversation today. So welcome, Tracy, to the show.
Thank you. You said you know me for 15 years. That's half of my life then, right? Because, I'm only 30, right?
Yeah, less than half my life. So, I mean, I don't even know. So Tracy is the CEO of her new company, HR Easy Inc. And but before that, our paths crossed in multiple places. But we're going to get into all that. But I want the audience, for those who don't know you, just to get a little bit of backstory on who you are, who's the person behind this podcast, introduce you for everybody. And I do this because, at the end of the day, nobody wants to talk about themselves, right? So I'll do it for you. And then afterwards, you tell me what I missed. Sound good?
Okay. Sounds good.
Here we go. So here's Tracy Jackson in like 60 seconds. All right. So Tracy grew up in Northern California, as did I, in Sonoma County in Rohnert Park. She was a hardcore athlete, loved softball, volleyball. She was raised by her single dad, who was a career police officer, who was nicknamed Officer Friendly. So, which is weird because then you grew up and you were so not friendly, So I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. And in fact, he has a school named after him, Lawrence E. Jones Middle School in Rohnert Park, which is really cool. As you were growing up, your first job was that hot dog on a stick, which is really funny because I think I've done like 25 episodes, and I think you're the third person whose first job was hot dog on a stick. So I think they know their target market, like 16-year-olds. Let's get them. And then you got into retail at Fan Stand, which I don't think is fun anymore, but sports apparel and whatnot. In high school, you excelled at sports. You were an MVP in softball. You were first team all league in volleyball. You were even on a team that represented California in like a national softball tournament, which is really cool. As you grew older, you went away to college, moved all the way across the coast to New York to go to St. John's for 2 years. And I love what you said that, this is pre-cell phone, so your phone bills were out of control. And I have a follow-up story on that I'm going to tell you. So you moved back to the West Coast for your final 2 years to San Diego State University, which is obviously the best school. It's where I went, right?
It really is.
And then while you were in school, you were interning for State Farm. And then after you got out of school, that turned into a full-time job where you were for 7 years, which is really cool. And then that also was the time when you fell in love with HR and got involved in HR. So then you went from State Farm and then eventually Apple, and then a few different stops where you worked your way up the corporate ladder. And then in 2004, you came on board as the vice president of HR at Sleep Train, which was a big game changer for yourself. That's where we met. And then you were there for 12 years, which included the Matt Firm kind of acquisition and all that stuff. And then you went on from there to become the Chief Human Resources Officer at Safe Credit and the EVP, and then eventually the president and CEO for HR Easy Inc., where you are now. During that time, you had a few small milestones, which would be you got married to your awesome husband, who you've been married for 24 years, who you refer to as Big Man, Kelvin, and you've had 3 amazing daughters. You became, a scuba diver. You traveled the world. You've been chased by elephants and surrounded by lions, and you have this amazing flight story. It's like incredible. And so I normally was going to say a little bit of it, but instead I realized I'm going to stop and then let you tell the story to everyone because I want to hear the story. So first off, that's Tracy. So what did I miss?
That was actually pretty darn good. So I'm impressed that you got all that in there. So yes. All right. So I have lots of horrible flight stories, and actually many of them happened in a row. Many people just said, I'm not traveling with you because it was horrible. So I was on my way to Texas one year. I'm pretty sure it was probably 93 or 94 because I know I was dating my husband, but we weren't married. So we started dating in 93, but that's a different story. As we're flying to Texas, it's just me. I hear the them saying, is there a doctor on board? Is there a doctor on board? And they're scrambling. People are jumping over seats. They have a guy on the ground. I'm trying to stay back so I don't crowd. So I just stay in my seat. But I know that there's someone who had a heart attack on our plane. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. Hopefully they can, get him under control. So as we're about to land, I see a whole bunch of lights on the landing strip. And I'm like, okay, it looks like fire department, lots of lights, ambulance, whatever. I just think that, okay, they're going to get this person off the plane. So I exit, and I know there's a lot of commotion going on around me, but I'm just doing my thing, thinking I don't want to be, looky-loo to this person who had this heart attack on the plane. So my family is actually in Texas. We're all doing like a reunion or something. And I get to the hotel, and they said, hey, were you on that flight that just came in? I said, yeah. They said, the one where the pilot got arrested? I said, the pilot got arrested. So I had to do a little search and find out that my pilot was actually, they were there to pick up my pilot. He had been drug trafficking. And so he got arrested, and the person on the plane got taken away on an ambulance. So yeah, it was an eventful day. So.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Yeah, I had a kind of similar story, a little bit different, but I showed up one night to go, we always go to these markets in Las Vegas. In fact, I leave in 2 days. And so, these late night flights to Vegas are always entertaining anyways, because there's just a unique crowd, usually like the person who's taking the 10 p.m. flight to Vegas. So I show up to the airport, and, I got my bags, and first thing I notice is like flight's delayed. And I'm like, oh God, all right. So I'll walk over to the bar, So we're in this little area in San Diego, has like this other little mini terminal where there's like 3 gates, and that's where we are, in this little place. So there's the only people there are for this Vegas flight. So then as soon as they say it's delayed an hour, everyone heads to the bar, because it's like, well, nothing to do, go to the bar. And as I'm walking in, I hear this guy get up, and he's like, I don't care if I can't get a drink anywhere else. I'm not sitting next to you anymore. And like storms off, and he's talking to this like sweet looking lady. She's probably in her 60s, and she just looks over at him and is like, and looks at me and kind of smiles. And I'm like, okay, I sit down. And then so she calls the bartender, and she's like, give me another one of those triples, like a triple and another triple, right? And the bartender's like, well, I don't know, you've already had 2 or something like that. Like, I don't know. And she's like, come on, Sonny, I drink all the time or whatever. And he goes, yeah, but you've run 2 people off the bar. And she's like, yeah, but I'm buying triples, so I'm making up for it. And this is like a conversation. I sit down. Within like 30 seconds, I realize she's just hammered, and she's just talking to anyone who will listen. And she's real obnoxious. And she keeps talking about how she's the Southwest #1 like flyer. She flies like 1 million miles a year or something. And how she's basically first class and all this stuff. And this guy next to me was like, we're on Southwest. There's no first class. Like, there's just not, you're Southwest. So anyways, we get on the plane, and she was like a whatever. So she gets on first and sits in the very first row. So I just go to the second row and sit down. And I had been talking to this couple next to me who were just getting married. They were going to Vegas for their honeymoon or something. So we were talking and doing, and kind of had a good conversation going. So when they get on the plane, they were like, hey, you want to just keep the conversation going? So they sit right next to me. So we're in the second row, and she's in the first row. And so we're boarding, the whole plane boards. And then all of a sudden, the last guy gets on, and he's like this real good looking lawyer type, he's got his briefcase, 40, just looking all slick. And he sits right next to, because no one sat by the lady in the first row, because everyone knew like she's just out of control. So he sits down, and I look at the couple next to me, and I go, oh, this is not going to end well. So right as she sits down, you can just see her just yapping at him. And we're taxiing back. We haven't even taken off yet. He hits his flight attendant button, and the flight attendant, leans over from her seat. And she's like, what's going on? And he's like, you need to move this lady. And the lady starts yelling. So apparently, like, she was saying some really inappropriate stuff. So the flight attendant gets up. They had to stop. We were going to take off. They slow the plane down. She gets up, and she whispers in his ear, and I can hear it because I'm in the aisle right here. She's like, hey, I've dealt with this before. It'd be easier if I ask you to move, because we don't want a scene, we can tell she's not. So he gets like,
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, sir, can you move back? So he moves like 8 rows back and sits down. So we take off. Everything's good for like 5 minutes. As soon as we hit that like 12,000 foot thing, she keeps looking back at him like this, and all of us are kind of like, what's going on? So all of a sudden she gets up her bag, she grabs her phone, She gets down, she turns on her phone or whatever. Then she gets up, she runs back the 8 rows and takes a picture of him, and then runs back down and sits down. And he hits the call button, and then he tells the flight attendant, this crazy lady just took a picture. You need to tell her to delete this picture. And the ladies, so the flight attendant's like, man, did you take a pic? No, nope. And like, so they get into an argument. She's like, you have to delete the picture. They get in this huge yelling match. The assistant pilot comes out. He's like, ma'am, you need to like, all stuff. And then she pushes the pilot. And apparently like you put your hands on a flight attendant or whatever, it's like a felony offense. So then some other guy comes from the back, who's, I don't know if he's a police officer or what it is. They kind of contain her or whatever. And granted, this is to Vegas. So the flight's like 20 minutes, So then the flight attendant from the back comes by everybody. And he's like, hey, when we get there, please everyone stay in your seats. Let her deboard first. And she kept saying, this isn't first, something about this is first class, like this is in her head. So all I remember is as she gets done, police are there at the thing, like right at the front, take her down. And we finally deboard like 10 minutes later. And as we're coming up the ramp, I can just hear her screaming about first class. And we get out, there's 10, officers around her. She's on the ground. She's still fighting with them in handcuffs. This is this like lady who's like this business traveler, and I just remember being like, oh my God, she literally ruined her life in half an hour, which is just incredible. So wild. Southwest.
I'm sure it was a slow progression, though. This was just, you got to see the crescendo.
Coming from a true HR professional, that's where your mind would go. I've seen this before. It's,
yes. Yeah.
So before we get into your stories, I do want to follow up on, you did mention, raised by a single dad, lifetime career cop. So how do you think that impacted your life and kind of how you ended up, getting into what you did and whatever? Do you think that had a big impact on it?
It obviously did. Clearly it did. I was very influenced by my father. I was really, really close to my father's family. Actually all of my family, but I was raised mostly around my dad's family. And I come from a massive family. That might have been another good story for you. My dad is one of 12. His dad is one of 12. And my mother's mother is one of 18. So yeah, I was a Jones. So keeping up with the Joneses, that came from us. So yeah. But my dad, it was one of the most amazing things about my father was his ability to come in and calm a situation that was chaotic. And so he had this uncanny ability to really get to know people and to personalize the conversations. It's interesting, as I was learning and going through college, I was a psychology major, took sociology classes, and they talk about like some of the mob mentality and how often what you do to calm a crowd is you come in and you recognize people and say, Tom, I know who you are. Jeffrey, I know who you are. Connie, I know who you are. And that takes away the mob mentality. And my dad had a way of knowing everybody in town and being able to calm situations. And it was just really interesting to hear people always telling me stories about him and about how he came in and brought some calmness into a situation. So it was really interesting. Lots of people had stories about him. And I remember a trip that we were on with Sleep Train. Every year they go to Maui because we had these top performer awards. The executives win as well. So I got to go to Hawaii, oh darn, every year. But I remember talking to a guy and he was telling me he happened to say something that his girlfriend lived in Rohnert Park. He didn't live there, but his girlfriend did. I said, oh, really? I said, I bet you she knows my dad. So he texts her and he says, whoa. And he looked at me and I said, what happened? He goes, actually, your dad saved her life. And so he goes to tell me a story about when she was a baby, she stopped breathing. And my dad was the first responder to get in and had resuscitated her. And I thought, how cool. But I mean, I don't know how this sounds, but I heard stories like this about my dad all the time. So it was, he had this ability to do that. And I think what's interesting is my dad was really big about learning names, which if you remember, I was too. That's something that I really felt like I needed to know, is feel like I know people really strongly. My grandmother was the master of all of that. Puts everyone to shame. My grandmother was the most incredible person I've ever met on this planet. She was just amazing. So it was interesting because I went to an elementary school across the street from her house, and my grandmother passed away at 95. I think she made 96 because it was right after her birthday. But I remember my grandmother being able to tell you almost every single one of her kids who went to, well, actually every generation, she could tell you all the kids and their genealogy. It was like reading the book of the Bible where you talk about genealogy of who is who and how this person was this person. And I remember my elementary school had all decades reunion. And we were there, and she could name almost every single person that was ever at that school and who they belonged to and everything. And I thought, I don't know how you did that, because I barely remember the ones in my class and the ones I even went to school with. But her memory was absolutely amazing. I remember calling her sometimes, and she's one of those people who remembered phone numbers. She wasn't about the cell phones, even though she passed away probably 5 years ago. I would call her and I'd say, "Hey, Gran, what is this person's number?" And she would tell me, "Oh, it's Klondike." I'm like, no. Tell me the numbers. She would say, "Well, it's Delaware." And then she would tell me, because that's how she remembers phone numbers is, when they first started, and she can almost tell you how they were all created. So yeah, she was an amazing storyteller. She knew people really well. My dad was really good and gifted at it. And I realized that seemed to serve them well. And so I tried to make it a point to really get to know people, because I felt like they responded better if they felt like you knew and cared about them.
Oh, 100%. And I can definitely validate that. I think that's something that definitely sticks out as a memory of you, coming down to, I was in San Diego at the time. Well, I've always been in San Diego, but you would come down from Sacramento, and it was like, how does Tracy know everybody already? How does she know all their names? We'd always be like, how do you know everyone? But I think at the end of the day, especially in HR, building those relationships and getting people to trust you enough to tell you what's going on or what they're struggling with, is just so important, and so having that ability, obviously, is huge. And I just like to hear the backstory, because, we know people, we work with them during certain times in our lives, and, people have these amazing gifts, and sometimes they inherently, is something that they kind of passed down or they picked up on, so we don't really know what that is. And so now I'm kind of hearing that, hey, it's coming from your dad and from your grandma, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned it was one other thing I had to talk about because it was really funny. So you mentioned your phone bill when you're at St. John's.
I mean, I think they couldn't even bend it. Remember, your phone bill was bent. I think I got a whole long, like, manila because the phone bill was like 32 cents a minute to call the West Coast, and it was ridiculous. I had to run from phone bills. I'm kind of embarrassed now, but I was like, well, we're moving, so I'm going to talk a lot this month, and we'll get that phone bill at the next place. And that was before they checked Social Security numbers. I remember actually my first job, I used my dad's Social Security number. They didn't care. They didn't. He's like, I don't know what your number is. Here, use mine. So.
One day someone's gonna be like, "Hey, Tracy, I want you to move to New York." You're like, "Nah, I can't go there. I'm not allowed. Not allowed in that state, unfortunately."
Oh, wait a second. This is the days when they had handwritten files. So, those I'm not worried about. Yeah.
Yeah. I always, when you said that, I had like this horrible memory too. So when I was in college, I lived in this house, a big house, 4 bedrooms, and then it had a detached garage. I lived in, so it was 5 of us or 6 always. So there's just people coming and going. And we had this one roommate. We needed an emergency roommate because this kid failed out of school in the semester. So my buddy's like, "Oh, I met this really cool kid on my soccer team. He needs a place to live." We're like, "Great." So he comes in, and turns out not so great. He just wasn't a fun roommate to live with. And at the time we met this other kid, Kevin, across the street, who became our best friend. We were skating every day, and he's like, "Man, I want to move in." And we're like, "Yeah, we want you to move in too." So we had a house meeting, like all 6 of us. And we told this guy, "Hey, we're sorry, but this is not working out. Like, we need you to move out at the end of the semester." It was like a month away. And we're like 20 at the time, 2021. He proceeds to give us a silent treatment for the whole 5 weeks. Doesn't say a word to anybody, but his family all lived in Israel. Not even extended, all of his family lived in Israel. So to get us back, he was calling Israel every night from our landline. So he really got the last laugh. He moves out, doesn't say a word to us. You know, our buddy moves in and we're all excited. And I'll never forget Todd Reiki, who you know, my buddy Todd.
Yes.
So Todd walks in one day because he managed all the house bills and he's just got this look on his face. He's like, and puts up this bill, you know, and it's like $700 or $800 or something, which today would be a lot. But then for us who had no money,
astronomical.
You know, our bill was like $20 normally, you know, between 5 of us. And we're like, $800, like, how are we going to pay this? So we actually threw a party to raise money for our phone bill. Phone bill party raise, which I thought was actually pretty good idea.
I love that story.
So, you know, before we get into kind of where you are now, obviously our history goes back to Sleep Train, you know, and I talked about your kind of progression, but I really want to know, because I haven't actually ever heard this from you, you know, so you came in 2004 as the VP of HR. And so just to preface for everyone listening, this is Sleep Train, which was Dale Carlson's company, you know, grew to be the biggest kind of mattress company on the West Coast and eventually sold to a mattress firm. But prior to that, 2004 is when I started too. There was basically no HR, right?
There really wasn't. I came in and I started the HR department, and I'll tell you, my first week there, I almost left. I don't know if you remember when did you start in 2004? Because if you started 2004, you beat me because I started November, November 22nd.
I started in April, and then.
Okay, so you were there before me.
Yeah.
Christmas party. That would have been my first time going down there because I started the week of Thanksgiving that Monday. And so here comes the senior VP of the company, Mike, come to tell me, hey, we got this policy. He and Dale tell me, we got this policy we need you to send out. And it's called the No Rapid Consumption of Alcohol Policy. This is my very first week at the company. And I said, wait a second. First off, you did this. So it was basically a no shots policy because they didn't want to go on this Christmas party tour that we were going on because they knew every stop that they would be told to take shots. So on my first week, they hand this policy to me to send out. And I said, this is suicide. You want me to start working today and send this out by the end of the week on my first week to tell people they can't do shots and you were doing it in the first place? And I remember thinking, my old boss said I got 2 weeks to figure it out if I want to come back, and I can come back. And I really seriously considered it.
Yeah, meanwhile, we're all in the stores going like, oh, this new Tracy come in now no one can do this or that. Like, they just set you up. They totally put you.
It was a total setup. And I was like, what the hell have you guys been doing? What am I going to uncover? So basically, I walked into this company of, basically, I was like the fraternity house mom that I'm having to tell everybody, now we got rules. And so, yeah, that's how I came into the company.
I think like the first time I think that a couple things happened back then in like 05, 06, where I remember, you know, being involved with you and seeing your face a couple of times. And the first one I think was 2005, because I got promoted right off the bat, like 9 months. And in 2005, we had our first like leadership SLT retreat in Reno. And that's when we used to do those skits. And I remember it was my first time in SLT. I've been promoted like the Friday before. Get on the plane. I'm so excited. And like the first day we're doing these skits. And I mean, if we were to go back now and watch video of those skits, I'm sure we would just die at what was happening, you know, but there was just no rules at the time. I mean, there was no real, like, it was just kind of, if it was funny, then we let it go, you know?
It was hard. It was hard to wrangle you guys all back in over those years. So yeah, but it was fun. I mean, I think of the fun times. My kids got my husband got lots of good stories. My kids liked some of them too, so they didn't get all of the stories. But sometimes I just had to come home and shake my head. So.
Oh my God! Yeah. Well, a lot of people wouldn't know this, but yeah. So I can remember having conversations with you and a few others before, because we used to do. Remember at our leadership conferences, we would do Sleep Train Idol, which was. And then I was the host. I played Ryan Seacrest for like 4 or 5 years in a row. And I just remember like sitting back, you know, and Tracy would come out and be like, all right, to the panel of judges, all right, guys, have fun, but like, please don't say this or this or this, you know, because it's like, you guys, you can't say this stuff, you know? And we had a few people on those panels that were definitely wild cards, to say the least.
There wasn't a few. There was one in particular. So
yes,
I'll just call him JJ. We know who he is.
Yes. Oh,
and he happened to be on my team, and I tried to send messages to him so they didn't see the walk of shame that I was going to take up to talk to him while the show was going on. I was like, get this message to him that he better bring it down some, or he will see the Tracy Jackson show up.
I can remember being on stage a couple times and literally just turning red, at like what he would say, and then not quite know what to do. Just be like, okay, moving on, next act.
Yeah, it was like he'd been waiting all of his life for that moment to.
He needed to be on some kind of reality show, though, for sure. It would have been. I would have watched, no doubt.
A cable network reality show, yeah.
So tell me, I love to just hear stories, and we love to get to know kind of the people behind these roles, and obviously we have a history, but. I'd love for you to, first off, all the sleep train stories are great and Mattress Firm and then Safe Credit, but now you're the CEO and president of this new company. So give us the 10,000 foot overview of what you're doing now and what HREZ is really all about.
So this was kind of my dream when I realized I was going to leave Sleep Train. I knew I loved working with culture and great cultures and building great cultures. And I also knew that it would be hard to replicate that. That was an organization that, I make fun of, and about the things that we started with, but the way that we came together and the way we refined that, it was kind of like a masterpiece that we created. And I was really, really happy with that. And I knew that it would be very difficult for me to ever put my stamp on an organization the way I did there, just because, a lot of organizations don't allow you to do those things that I was able to do. And so I decided while I was at Sleep Train, I actually envisioned this, came up with the name and everything, that I wanted to have an organization or an HR consulting firm that worked with smaller organizations to help them grow and build organizations with really great cultures. And so this is like a fractional C-suite organization, but I also do a lot of work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So DE&I, something that I've always felt passionate about. And I've also felt like my hands were tied to work in those areas and to say things that I wanted to say while I worked for an organization. Because when you have an executive title, you don't speak for yourself any longer. You're always going to be a spokesperson for the organization, so I knew that anything I said would be attached to the organization that I worked with if I wanted to speak on these kinds of issues. And so this now, with me belonging to my own organization, I can actually push the envelope more than I can working within a system. Now, maybe that's not true in every organization, but for the majority of organizations, there's a lot of things that, if I wanted to say Black Lives Matter in an organization, they might say, Tracy, you need to slow down. And I would get the brakes pumped on some things. Or I wouldn't want to say that and represent an organization if I didn't think that they would back up those words. Yeah. And so it was important for me. And I felt like I had the covering from the fact that Dale set us up in a really great position when we were leaving, that I could finally step out on my own and do some things and take a little bit more of a calculated risk. And I thought, if I'm going to bet on anybody, I'm going to bet on myself, because I really feel like I can do this and excel. And I had seen some people do some training and speak on these issues, and I knew I could do it better. And I knew that they were just doing it to check a box to say that this had happened and they got the training. But I knew it was very personal to me. And I had a lot of experiences that I could share that would help people to understand why this was important. And so that's the reason why I started HREZ, is for those purposes.
That's awesome. And obviously, I mean, timing wise, the last year and a half has been pretty crazy. And I know I've seen, just by following you on your LinkedIn and whatnot, you ended up having tons of opportunities to go around and speak, and probably do, I would imagine, more of that stuff than you probably ever thought.
What's interesting is COVID actually opened doors for me that I didn't anticipate. So now people are so much more used to seeing people in virtual spaces. I don't have to be everywhere. And so that was an unexpected good byproduct of COVID that I get to go speak at conferences and with organizations that maybe would have been resistant if they want you present for this or whatever the case is. So I feel like, I'm able to actually get around or to have my message go a little broader than I could have maybe pre-COVID. So.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that I'm really interested in, which is, how do you get companies and how do companies, have events, do speakers, start, diversity inclusion groups, like do different things and actually do it for the right core reasons and really have an impact on their culture versus that check of the box. Because it feels like the bigger the company, the harder it would be to just not to seem like I'm just checking this box. Like how do companies do that?
Well, they have to approach it like they would any strategic objective in the organization. You have to have metrics behind it. It has to be on paper. It has to be a true value of your organization that you believe in this. And you also have to do some convincing and helping people to understand that this is not just a feel-good measure. It is a business initiative. It's a profitability issue. And there's a lot of statistics and research done on how organizations that are more diverse are profitable, more profitable than those that aren't. Having more women in executive roles or on the board, how having more diversity and than not having diversity. And so how it's attached to the profitability. And when you think about the changing demographics of the world, especially of the United States, and increasingly with big states like California and New York, the numbers are shifting. And actually right now, California does not have a majority. And majority doesn't mean doesn't have a largest population. It means that there isn't more than 50% of a population. The largest growing population is the Hispanic Latino group. They're growing exponentially, and the white population is declining. Black population is steady. Asian population is going up about 1%. However, the population that's really growing increasingly is more than the biracial and multiracial groups. And so we're going to become much more racially complex. And also by the end of this decade, if we think about it, by the end of 2030, so that's 8.5 years, less than 8.5 years, all the baby boomers will be 65 years and older. So they still represent a large majority of executives, but they are exiting the workplace exponentially. And the biggest group of people that will be left are the millennials, not the Xers. And I know you would probably think that the Generation X is right behind them, but the millennials are going to represent a large portion of the workforce. The millennials have a different value system than the boomers. They're strikingly different. Xers are somewhere in the middle. Yeah. It's going to change how business is done. I mean, people have to understand that you're either going to be Blockbuster and go out of business because you didn't keep up with the times and don't understand that this group is coming in. The baby boomers are exponentially dying. It's just because of age. And so they're not the population that's going to be in leadership or the population you'll serve. The millennials are definitely driven by values, by their own personal values, by social issues. They want you to be environmentally conscious. If you're not aware of all of these different things and that the fact that we're becoming a much more racially complex world and nation, you're going to lose. And so I try to help bring those things to light. Not just, it feels good to say Black Lives Matter. We didn't like what happened to George Floyd. Of course, those things matter, but I try to help them understand that there's a business model. And this is about being successful in your organization to embrace this. These are the customers you serve. These are the people you want to employ. You want the top tier talent. You want to make sure that you understand that could be a person who's trans, and how do you demonstrate respect to them? And, a lot of people fear having diversity training because they think that is something I really talk about that I don't do. Because what I don't want people to think is you have to change your political affiliation. You don't, to demonstrate respect and embrace people of diverse groups. You don't have to change your religious beliefs, because there are some things that cross over into those areas. What I tell them is these are more rules of engagement. And if you understand how to demonstrate respect and show and how to engage with different populations, this is how you're going to win. It doesn't mean that you can't continue to be a Catholic or a Mormon or a Christian or non-religious person. But how do you demonstrate respect between these people, between the liberals and the conservatives and the Tea Parties and the Green Party? There is a way to actually engage respectfully between those groups, and I talk about that. So I don't know if that was too much of an answer for you,
No,
but
trust me, everyone listening out there, to hire Tracy, come speak. That was your key to say. That was awesome.
Yeah, so that's what I'm passionate about, and I love that I can really push into that area. So
yeah, I mean, just personally in our organization, I know I introduced you to our vice president of HR, Raquel, who's done some amazing things.
She's pretty awesome.
And we've got this really cool, D&I group, and we've been meeting, but it's like this to the point, like it's been this whole kind of challenge over the year and a half of like, hey, how do we make really cool, kind of deep rooted, systematic, like cultural changes versus like stamping the box, so we're trying to, navigate that. And I think, I actually want to dovetail, because you mentioned something that you actually have a perfect example of this, but the purpose of this season 2 of this podcast has really been highlighting these different amazing female executives, really in underrepresented leadership industries. And mainly because the industry that I've always worked in, this mattress industry, is like one of the worst, especially like if you think back to when you started at Sleep Train in 2004, our entire industry was basically older white dudes in box suits. That was and it's slowly changing, but it's still very far behind. And so how do organizations in these kind of industries, mattress, furniture, car, automotive, like tech, like that are very underrepresented, like to your point, if the buying market and the leadership market in the next 10 years is millennial strong, like aren't those industries in a lot of trouble if they can't figure out a way to start bringing in a more diverse leadership group?
That's exactly it. I'm trying to help them sound the alarm now to make adjustments and shifts in how they operate so that they can, adjust to the times that we have and to still be profitable. Because if you don't stay ahead of those curves, it's not just technology you got to stay ahead of. You got to stay ahead of social and, the social trends and just the reality, the demographic shifts that are taking place. So yes.
What was your first thought the first time you walked into an executive meeting at Sleep Train and you were the only female?
Well, I wasn't the only female. I was the only non-white male. So, and that remained that way. And I can't say that it was comfortable. It was really difficult and it was challenging. And there's only so much you can kick and scream and say things. And occasionally I would get some allies, Your boss, Matt Anderson, was pretty darn good at that. Hernani Alves, who's an amazing partner that I sometimes actually do presentations with, who ended up being the president of Sleep Train and is an author. He was a great ally at times, but sometimes you had to rely on your allies because there were people, and I experienced it there and I experienced it other places who, would try to silence your voice because you're a female, you're just crying wolf. I remember, well, there was an issue that I won't necessarily bring up because it wasn't the best one, and I'd rather not. But someone said, "How come no one said this?" And finally, her nanny said she did say it. That's what, and no one else said anything. He said she did say it, and yeah, we got slapped on the wrist for something that I did say. But there were times where people would just say, "Oh, you're not an industry, person, or you're HR," and they would try to put me in a little bubble. And it wasn't just there. That's life. And I'm not specifically saying that's always because I was a woman or always because of different race. Those people were my people. I really felt like I was a part of the team in a lot of ways. There were a lot of times when I didn't. Yeah. And, there's some of it that was inherent to the fact that, we go on trips and many of them would share rooms. And of course, I'm not sharing a room with any of them. So they would team up and do things. And I'd find out later, like, oh, they all got together and went out. So, some things happen and they just naturally happened that were a little isolating, but it was challenging at times. There was times I remember sitting in rooms with when we were having meetings, and of course I'm the only in a couple categories, and it was like I have the worst cramps right now. And if a tear rolls down my eye because I'm just barely existing here, but there's no way I could ever say that, or anyone in this room could even sympathize with the fact that I am dying in pain and cramps right now. I almost want to get next to the trash can so I can throw up. And then someone asks me a question and I'm like, I can't even answer. I can barely hear. My ears are ringing because I'm in so much freaking pain.
That's wild. So crazy.
Yes.
So tell me, along those lines, as you think back at your career, what to get to where you are today and have your own company and have these huge successes from an executive perspective, like what do you look back at and from a failure perspective, like what defined you, or what was really difficult that you had to get through, and how did you do it?
That's a good question. I didn't know I was really driven, quite honestly. I had to figure this out and people had to point it out to me. I just thought I'm just going to do a good job. But yeah, there's a lot of sacrifices that I made. And, there's sometimes I wonder if they were things that I should regret, or if they'll be on my regret list. I had to travel a lot and I was gone. I don't think people realized how much I travel. I was on 30 to 40 round trips a year when my kids were growing up, and I have 3 daughters. And so there's a lot of things that I missed. And sometimes I would show up at their school and they would wonder who I was. Some of the other moms would be like, who are you? One of my favorite stories, though, and I'll digress and then come back. Yeah. A lady said to me, excuse me. And I said, yes. She goes, are you like a train engineer? And I said, what? So I figured out my daughters thought I worked at Sleep Train and didn't know what I did. So she told them I was a train engineer. So
ride the train around, fix it.
Yeah, yes. And I remember the first time she came to my job with me, she's like, I don't get it. Where do you sleep and where's the train? So she thought I slept on a train, and then that didn't work for her. Then I became a train engineer. So the stories would progress about where I was. So yeah. Failures. You know what? Quite honestly, I'm going to tell you that my biggest failure is not speaking up as much as I should have in some situations, but it was exhausting at times to be the only.
Yeah.
And there were times I should have spoken up even more, even though, the one time her nanny, he had my back. Anderson would have my back too. They were probably my biggest 2 allies at times, but I should have spoken up more. I should have said more in certain areas. I should have pushed back on some things, but it was exhausting. And so when I actually think about things that I regret, it's usually when I didn't speak up when I should have, just because I was tired of being the only voice of dissension at times. So
yeah. And what would you, if you could go back and tell your younger self a piece of advice, like on how to do, like how would you even do that? How would you muster the strength to kind of do it, and what,
today is different than it is then. I think if I would have, it has nothing to do with my age. It's just the time. As time changes, so do attitudes, and they shift and soften in certain areas. And today I would have felt much more confident and had the ability to stand up and say some things about certain areas. But I also knew that I could have risked my job by being the outlier all the time, and to stand up. And so, yeah, it's challenging. It's hard to be the trailblazer in an area, being the only, people would come up to me in the organization saying, Tracy, I'm so glad you're in the organization. It gives women hope. People who were of different ethnicities would tell me the same thing. Tracy, it gives me hope that I know I can move up in the company. And then people who are LGBTQ said, Tracy, I'm so glad you're in this position. I know I can trust you. I know you'll represent my thoughts and my needs and things. And it was great to hear it, but at the same time, it could be a burden as well, to feel like you shoulder all of those people's, what their interests are, and to represent them, and to want to properly represent them. in knowing that it's going to go against the tide with the group that you're in. So it's a tough balancing act. And again, a lot of eyes are on you. And it wasn't sometimes just what, like, a lot of people could make mistakes who are on the executive team and they wouldn't be categorized as that's the woman's failure. That's the Black woman's failure. That's, it. So I knew that failure would be exponential for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were times that I took more safe paths than not. I'm not saying always, because I did speak up and I did do some things, but there are times I could have done more.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful, and I think that, it's like you said, you filled a bunch of only boxes, which is
Mm-hmm.
in itself is, I can imagine being very stressful, because I think from what I'm hearing now, besides just the nature of it being a very intense job anyways, then it sounds like you're also feeling the weight of the world, like, hey, I got to succeed too, because I'm representing all these different people that are kind of looking up to me. I can't blow it. Like, I got to succeed. That's a lot of pressure.
It is. It was, and it still is. And so it feels good to not be in that kind of role anymore. So yeah, and it gets exhausting when you feel like you're just going to be fighting all the time. So sometimes you just have to regroup and gain your energy back up, refocus, figure out what your priorities are going to be to really go after them. So if I were to go into that role today and the different time period, and I would approach things differently because I have wisdom and maturity. So I'm not saying I was immature, but I did the best I could in the circumstances that I was in. I also knew that I didn't want to jeopardize my job. It wasn't just me who, again, was in this position. It was my family. I can tell you that I give a lot of credit to my career to my in-laws. That may sound crazy, but if I got a bonus, they got a bonus, because I had them move from San Jose to around the corner from me to take care of my kids, so that I knew that they were cared for when I was gone, so I could do the best job I could. If they didn't do that for me, there's no way I would do a good job. There's no way I would exceed in my career. There's no way, if my husband was not my biggest supporter, that I could have done these things. So I knew it wasn't just me who fails too. So it wasn't just the eyes in the organization who were all looking at me. It was also this whole group of people. You talk about it takes a village. Many of them sacrificed to get me to the position where I was. My dad sacrificed, and my dad passed away back in 2009, but I can tell you that when I came home one time from college, it was like for Christmas, there was a leak in the ceiling and the carpet was all wet, and he had little buckets and stuff. And I go, Dad, what's going on here? Well, he's like, well, the loan I took out for the house, I spent for your college. So I'll deal with this, but it's all about you, and you're my greatest investment. And that's what he told me. And so as much as, what a compliment to me, but I also knew I cannot let these people down who've all made sacrifices, to put me in a position where I was, to set me up for success. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love that story, and I think that the good news is that you did it, which is really
did it. And a lot of people I made a lot of people proud, including myself. My husband, I know he's incredibly proud of me. And what's really interesting is I have 3 daughters, and I know that they look at me. And so it's funny, I was telling the story this week. I went to one of those parent-teacher conferences, and the teacher said, your daughter writes about you in Seattle a lot. Do you go to Seattle a lot? I go, I do. So, but I remember one year I wasn't home. I remember exactly, I went as far back as August, and I was gone every single week from August till the end of the year. And I remember telling them I'm taking time off right around Christmas so I could have some time off. And I told the girls, I said, I just want to apologize to you guys, because I know I haven't been here a lot like I should. And my daughters, in their beautiful wisdom, and they had to be probably 12, 8, and 7 or something like that, the 3 of them, as I'm telling them this, they go, why are you apologizing? We think your career Cool. We want to be like you when we grow up. We love that you have this job. And here I am feeling this mom guilt that dads don't feel. So again, I have this additional thing that, dads who travel and they know they're with their mom, they're fine for the most part. Here I am feeling like I'm having them miss their mom, and they told me they're with their grandparents or their dad and they're fine. And I don't, so there's all these different things that we have. We want to be a good wife. We want to be a good parent. We want to be a good daughter-in-law because my in-laws are amazing. I want to represent my family in the best possible light. And, all of them have made sacrifices for my success. And I want to do a great job because I think Dale is amazing. And he took a risk in selecting me for this role. And so, yeah. So it's a lot of pressure.
And, it's funny because, as parents, I think it's very common to, make up these stories in our heads of like what our kids are interpreting or how, like what they're thinking or, oh my God, this or that. And then, when they get a little older, it's wild when they tell you, oh no, this is how I actually view this or whatever.
Right.
I was telling you before we started recording, but my kids have been going back and forth from New York all summer because their mom works in New York, and we deal with that during the year. Like I've always felt, as a kids growing up with, split household, like I hold that guilt, that tremendously, like, oh my God, they're, how's this going to show up as they're adults and all these different things. But then when they've gotten older, of course, that's going to affect them. But what they mention is like, oh, well, my ex-wife and I, we get along so well. We co-parent so well. We have all these opportunities. I get to live in New York. I get to come back. We travel. Mom had a business. Like, you're doing these cool things. Like, that's the interpretation, right? From them. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, that's different than I was making out in my head, like, cause we're so hard on ourselves sometimes, and like, oh man, like this or that. But at the end of the day, I mean, to your point, we're trying to do the best. And, if you really are, then I think at the end of the day, it's going to work out how it's going to work out,
Right.
So talking about that and success, if you look back at your career, like, is there one moment that you still think, you just smile when you think about it, like something happened, some success happened that, you just couldn't believe?
Our ESOP was amazing. The fact that, so while we were at Sleep Train, we became an ESOP organization. Our CEO, Dale Carlson, who's amazing. I think you had him on maybe a couple times. You should have him on more. He's got plenty of great stories. Amazing man. Him and his wife, Katie, wonderful people. But gave 25% of the company to the employees. And, people go, well, how much did, people think that they made out all this money with the sale to Mattress Firm. I go, they gave 25% of the company to the employees. And over the cycle of the ESOP, so basically the employees are given the company, there's a certain value, kind of like giving some free stock to the company. The employees built that up. It started off, the value of the ESOP was $13.1 million. And that was the program I oversaw, was the ESOP. By the time we sold it, less than 5 years later, the value was $117 million. That's what went to our employees. And I still am in awe that we were able to do that kind of growth in that short a period of time. We got ESOP awards from the national organization, from the regional organization. I mean, we were like the poster child when it came to ESOPs. So that was pretty amazing. And the day we put our name on that arena, when it became Sleep Train Arena, that was freaking awesome. I still look at that building because it exists.
Yeah,
and it actually became like a COVID field hospital for a little while. But I think how freaking amazing to be a part of a team who could sit around a table, come up with something so impactful and go, look, it's right there. We can see it. Yeah. And when I traveled and people would sometimes see something with Sleep Train, they go, oh, is that where the Kings play? And I go, well, I don't work for them, but that's my company. Yeah. So there was a lot of pride that I feel like Sleep Train is where I'm most, it owns a piece of my heart. It's a piece of real estate that sits there that will forever be a part of my heart. My kids, it's so funny. If I called one of them, one of them probably has a Sleep Train shirt on. They still wear Sleep Train. They love Sleep Train. They love everything about what Sleep Train did. So even anything that was bad that happened, exponentially great things happened because of what I worked at Sleep Train. So who cares about those bad days? They're overshadowed by far by all the great days. So, you know, my career working with those people, with the team at Sleep Train was amazing. And then the sale of the company, selling our company for, was it 450, 425 million? And, you know, I go, my name is on that document. They named only a few people and my name is on that document. That's pretty freaking amazing. So those are some of the highlights.
Yes, and I share many of those with you, which is great. You know, that was a wild time. I told the story of I actually I was not at the leadership conference when we found out the news of the ESOP, because I had shattered my shoulder, and I still have this giant thing in here with all these screws because I had taken Simmons at the time had put together a big contest for skiing and snowboarding up in Big Bear. And then Scott Higgins, who was the RVP of SoCal, was like, "Hey man, I really need you to go, you know, and make sure no one gets hurt. Like, nothing bad happens." I'm like, "Oh, great." And of course I shattered my whole collarbone and shoulder. And so I was in a bed. I had just come out of surgery. And I remember Anderson was like, "Hey, I'm going to call you." And then, you know, we did like a Skype, and he Skyped in from his computer, and he had sent me a box and said, "Don't open it until what?" So I was Skyping in live when Dale was up on the stage and did the whole, like, "Now open your box." And it was the mirror, you know, like, because he said that, you know, they sold the company and everyone freaked out and then it was us or whatever, which was a brilliant way to do it. It's just, everyone has this great memory of being there and partying and celebrating. I was like, oh, I was miserable post-surgery, like shattered shoulder. But it was just such a great time, you know, and I talk about it actually often now, you know. I think, as a lot of us do who work there, you know, I think our SLT team, or that top group of like 25 people, I don't think there was one change in the last like 4 or 5 years before that sale. It was just so constant, you know, and we get together every quarter for those meetings, and it was just exciting to watch how the becoming employee owned really wove down to the DNA of the company culture so fast. You know, I mean, it was just the person who'd been hired 5 days was like, "Hey, turn over that paper, let's reuse it." You know, it was just like, it didn't matter what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like, "Hey, we have a piece of this, so don't waste money. Like, let's be smart. Let's grow money. Let's do this," you know, which is just so great. You know, and I think that, you know, there's probably so many amazing organizations that could be the one thing that would take them to the next level. You know,
I totally agree. And, you know, if there's anybody who I could convince to really consider that, I would really highly encourage people to look into it. And the ESOP community is amazing. They are willing to share their secrets and, you know, advice and information. It was one of the most welcoming communities I've ever been a part of. And so to oversee and lead that initiative to really gain value with it, and to develop the ESOP, the different committees that I had across the organization, it was amazing just to see the engagement and the level of care and concern that the employees took in making that organization what it was. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. So I've got 2 last questions. I know I said it would be a half an hour.
Hey, keep asking.
So last 2 questions. So second to last is, so what would be your advice for somebody, let's say you got somebody getting out of college, right? I don't know what to do, you know, and they look at industries like the mattress industry, or, you know, tech or automotive, or like industries that are very underrepresented, you know, from a leadership perspective, whether it's diversity, whether it's male, female. You know, you took a plunge and you took a chance to come into an industry like Sleep Train, right? And walk into a room where you were only. You know, what advice would you give to young people, like looking at these different career paths and maybe being scared of jumping in and joining an industry like that?
You know, I think it's important for anyone to know what the culture of an organization is. The widget or the service that they sell, as long as it's ethical in your mind, that's almost irrelevant. It's really the culture. Nobody would have said, "Oh, I wanted to sell beds," but you would be incredibly and just surprised at how long people stayed at the organization, because it was a great place to go. You didn't wake up dreading to go to work. And that's what you need to do, is to figure out a place that you don't dread going and figure out where your spot is and really press into learning more about that as much as you can. I started in insurance. I never wanted to work in insurance, but that's where I started. And that's where I found out I loved HR. The person who hired me into my internship, I never thought of HR. I didn't know that was a career. Quite honestly, I was too young. I was 20 when I found out about this internship. I just wanted a job. And her name is Valerie Alston. And I remember feeling like she changed my life. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to work in a business that changes people's lives. And she just did it. And so I was like, I want to be like Valerie Alston. And so she was the person who I had in mind the whole time as I'm developing my careers. So find people who you admire and respect, and ask them about opportunities, what they would do, because you're going to find them on a micro level. I'm telling you on a macro level, of course, but finding somebody on a smaller level who you feel like you want to model your career after and work with, and see if they usually are connected to people within their industry. They'll usually be able to give you some really sound advice. And it's really good also to know an industry, but I also kind of like that I'm not an industry person, meaning that I can work in any industry. I've worked in casinos, I worked in insurance, I worked at Apple, I worked at mattresses, I worked in banking. So it's kind of nice that I felt like I wanted to work in an environment where it was universal. Didn't matter what the organization was. I just want to work in an organization with a great culture, and really press into that and continue to be a learner. I think it's important to not just feel like you can step into a role and then just learn the job, but continuously getting external learning so that you can develop those skills and keep them sharp and fresh.
Yeah. And that being said, so imagine there's people in all different industries listening, which there are, which is great. How do people get in contact with you? Let's say they're listening, they're like, you know what? I love what Tracy's saying right now. I need some help. So I know you've got like your little things for people watching on video. You can kind of see your contact, but what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you if they're like, you know what? I would love Tracy to come and speak.
Oh, and I would love to do that. So, and I help organizations put together their diversity initiatives and things of the sort. So they can go to my website. That's probably the easiest one, HREZ Inc. INC. So HREZINC.com, or you can contact me. You can go to info@HREZinc.com, or you can come directly to my email, and it's Tracy, TRACY, @HREZinc.com, or give us a call. Even my cell phone, I actually have listed on if you're looking at this, my cell phone is 916-208-0205, and that comes right to this phone right here that's sitting in front of me. And I have a business line, so you can look me up.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's like commercials. I remember like there was a guy back in the day, what was it, Cal Worthington? He used to put like his number, like,
oh my gosh, go see Cal.
He called me direct or whatever, but I actually love it because, for people listening out there, I just think that, and you would know this more than I, but just from my colleagues and businesses I see, I just feel like there's so many industries at a major inflection point right now where they have got to adapt, and they're at a road, and it's like, dude, you got to fork this way. And I just think there's a lot of organizations like holding because they just aren't confident of, how do I do that? How do I head this way?
You're right.
Hire more diversity? How do I bring in new leaders? How do I do these things? And so instead of doing anything, they're just kind of sitting there, and it's like, this is not good. You need to like start.
They get parallels. Yeah. They get paralyzed in the I can'ts, and I don't want to. So I don't want to offend. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. And they get stuck there. And I try to get them unstuck out of that and play to win. We talked about at Sleep Train how we play to win. So we think win, win, win. So you have to think about what you do want to do. You want to make sure you're the best employer. You attract the top tier talent, that you make room for anyone at the table who deserves a seat to be there. That's what you talk about, is what you do want to do. And that will allow you to move forward, because if you get stuck in the I can'ts, you won't do anything. You'll stay the same way. You're going to do the same things that you've been doing. So
100%. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I could talk for like 9 hours, but
I can too. I got a mouthpiece here, so yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope that, I can connect some dots with people to you, because obviously I think the world of you, and I know that you know, you would bring a lot to any organization that would reach out. So thank you for being on. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care.